I am Marty Roland. I'm a friend of Alan Libby's, and they asked me to interview Alan for his gallery talk, so I was very happy to say that I would do that. I've known both of them for many years, and in the interest of full disclosure, I have never been a patient of Alan's. As many of you know, he has been a very successful dentist for many years, and we'll talk about that more later in the talk. But thank you very much all for coming. This is an incredibly impressive retrospective for Alan's 40 years as an artist. So I want to say that we'll be talking about a number of things as we're talking, and we are going to be sitting down. But as we're talking, if anybody does have a question or a thought they want to ask, please do ask it, although we are going to have time at the end of this conversation to ask questions of Alan, so just so you know that. First of all, I do want to congratulate you again. This is a fabulous show. It's just wonderful. Truly, truly wonderful.
I have to say that without all of you showing up and supporting me, it wouldn't feel nearly as good. I am overwhelmed today. We had a great opening reception on Friday, a week ago. It was great. But today I thought, you know, when you give a gallery talk, maybe if 10 people show up, you're pretty happy. This is overwhelming, and I can't thank you enough.
So now we're going to sit down. I'd like to start off with the early years. My understanding, Alan, is that this all began with clay back in 1973. And while you were working as a dentist, so I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about how that happened.
I've told this a number of times, but Libby never ceases to enjoy my telling it again, so I'm going to tell it again. And that is, I was working, I'm going to stand up. She tells me to stand up, I stand up.
You're right. Yeah.
I was working like 5 days a week and about 3 nights, and I was working really hard the first 10 years of my practice. And Libby said, you know, there's a class in clay for fathers and children at the Wallingford Art Center on Saturday afternoons. I said, oh, I can't do that. I'm working then. She says, well, so just stop working on Saturday afternoons. I said, all right, let's give it a try. And I took this class with my son Adam, my older son Adam, and it just hit me right off the bat. And the first piece that I ever did is on display right in the back. It's called Duck Bear. It's a little piece that I still like a lot. And whenever people say, "What how do I get into art?" I think clay is one of the great entrees into art. It's so malleable and easy to mess around with. So that's how I got into it. But I fell in love with it. My son gave it up very quickly. But I fell in love with clay, and I did clay for 12 years.
Earlier today, someone was looking at that piece and asked about the name. Can you just speak to that? How did the name Duck Bear come about?
Well, names are always an issue. My friend John Brodsky disagrees with any name I ever give any piece of artwork anyhow, but you know our friend John. So it was a challenge. We had a tremendous teacher. If you have a great teacher early on in any subject, it's just the greatest thing that can happen. I had Shirley Tassencourt was a spectacular artist and a great human being and a wonderful teacher. And she gave us this challenge, gave us a big block of clay and said, you can only subtract from the block, nothing else. No add. Once you take it off, you can't put it back on. You can mold it, you can manipulate it, you can't put it back on. So that's what we did, and Duck Bear came out. It just, when I looked at it, I said, oh, it's a duck, or is it a bear, or I don't know, it's a Duck Bear. that's how the name came, sorry about that.
How about the quirky name of your retrospective? I never owned a lawnmower.
Yes, it is quirky, but it's also meaningful because this is a day and age when everyone wants to do everything. You want to be a mom, a mother. That's a mom and a mother. It's the same thing, isn't it? A wife, a business lady, a businessman, active in the community, involved in their religion, involved in their non-religion, whatever it is. They're involved in millions of things. And my theory is you can't do everything. You have to say no to some things. I said no to working around the house and doing all that fix-up stuff. So I never bought a lawnmower, and Libby supported me on that. And that gave me some free time. The other thing that gave me time to actually have a second avocation, it started out, was that I lived within about 10 minutes of where my office was. So that just created a whole lot of time instead of being on the road for an hour each way somewhere or other. So that's what I never owned a lawnmower is about. So it is very profound, believe me.
And in those early years, how did you begin to exhibit your artwork? What was your intention back then?
I had no intention of exhibiting my artwork. I was just having such a good time. I was discovered by a 9-year-old friend of Dan's. Dan's, you're buried back there, Dan? Hi, Dan. My son, Dan. His friend, David Wax? Was it? David?
Yeah, it was.
Well, which Wax kid were you friendly with?
David.
David. It was David. And some people know them from our neighborhood in Wallingford. He comes in with my son Dan, and he sees what I'm doing. I started out doing. I always worked with themes. That was innate for me to work with themes in my work. And I was doing Jewish ritual objects. I was making mezuzahs. That's a little sculptured high that goes on the doorpost of a Jewish household. Okay. He sees me doing this, and he says, you know, my mother's doing this art exhibit at the Balch Institute, and you should be in it. And I said, well, really? Because it was just like a hobby I was having fun with. So I said, all right. So I was in it, and Libby was in that also. And people from the University of Pennsylvania came to the show. The Balch Institute was a fantastic museum downtown, which disappeared. But it was really great. And the people from the University of Pennsylvania folklore department really loved my work. They were like raku Jewish pieces. No one ever did raku for Jewish pieces before, I don't think. And they started inviting me to display and do stuff. And then they invited me to shows at the Jewish Museum in Philadelphia. And ultimately in 1985, Libby and I both had one-person shows at the Jewish Museum in Philadelphia. So it all started because of this 9-year-old kid who happened to walk into our basement where I was just monkeying around with stuff.
So you mentioned that you have themes in your artwork, so I have two important questions for you. Are there any themes that reoccur? And what exactly is it that you want your art to do?
Themes do recur. The circle, geometric forms, that reoccurs without thinking about it. The circle of life is it something that's been part of my work for a long time. What was the other question part of it?
What do you want your art to do?
Oh, what do I want my art to do? That's easy. I want the person who stops by the piece, not to knock it off the wall, but to... but I want there to be a powerful moment when you see each and every piece. I want it to kind of stop you a little bit in your tracks, so that you just can't breeze by it. But Libby and I go to so many art shows, and a lot of times you can go through the show very rapidly, and there's just nothing that's overwhelming about the piece. I want the piece to stop and maybe gotta take note of it and maybe take a little mental picture of it, and when you leave, something remains. So that's what I want, something to remain in your head.
So it sounds like you want people to slow down and take a moment and really be there with the piece.
Yes, yes, that would be great, but more importantly, I want them to interact in a way that it just goes like, there's a click and it's embedded in some way, and there's an afterthought. When they leave the piece, they can still bring it up. It's there. There's something. If not the whole piece, there's some inference from the piece that sticks. I know it's hard to go through all this stuff and have every single thing kind of stick in your head. But if a couple things stick in your head, that would make me feel very good.
I understand that Joseph Campbell was very influential on you. So can you tell us about that and who were some of your other mentors?
Joseph Campbell is my main mentor, was my main mentor, probably always will be my main mentor. We discovered him. I was on the telephone with Enid Mark, who was a local artist, a fabulous artist in our community. And she said, "Oh, I have to hang up, Alan." She was a very abrupt kind of person. So I have to hang up. I said, "What's?" She says, "Joseph Campbell's on, and you should look at him too." I thought that's the way she always spoke. You know, she's very directive. So I said, "Well," she said, "Just put it. It's on television. Put it on." So I put it on. It's on public television. Bill Moyers is interviewing Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell literally knocked my socks off. He just spoke, and he had a special affinity toward artists, people in general, but his main thing was to find your direction, find your bliss, as he put it, in life. And that's, I guess, what I did, and why I actually even left dentistry, which I liked and loved at the time very much, but this art thing just kind of overwhelmed me, and that's where I found my bliss again.
Well, making art certainly does have challenges. I think there's many artists in the audience. I recognize quite a few of you, and I think we all know that making art has its special challenges. So I'd like to know for you what some of the challenges to making art have been and how you coped with them. Although I also have to say a little bit of a sideline here, that speaking of challenges, many of you know that Libby and Alan about a month ago had their pipes break. And so 3 floors were flooded in their home and down into the studio area. So they came back to this in February, and I'm just in awe of the fact that we're even standing here and this show is together. So I consider that a huge challenge. Certainly more of a physical one than an emotional one. But if you could tell us more about the challenges you feel that you've faced and how you've dealt with them in making art.
Actually, making art takes guts. It really does. A lot of people won't even start to make art because of possible public ridicule, especially ridicule by your family. You know, like you make a piece of art and your mate says, "What the heck is that?" You know, or what is that? Makes some remark that can knock you down a few pegs. So I never worried about that. I think that was that challenge I was able to overcome, that somehow or other I could take risks, I could try things, and eventually, as you get more skilled, you find that you can work through problems. Like in any business or profession or whatever you do, you find ways to work through problems. And in art, the same thing. Doing abstract art is even more difficult in that you don't know where you're going. So you don't know where the answer is. And there are many answers. Almost any piece could be dealt with in a different way and still be successful or still be a failure. So you have to have confidence not false confidence, but by doing it for a long time, you start to feel that you can work through the challenges. And every piece, if I start a piece of artwork tomorrow, the fact that I've worked for 40 years, I'll still be challenged tremendously by it. And I won't solve it in an instant. I'll be working sequentially, day after day, making changes. Some are successful, most are not, and just keep working it through until it finds a resolution.
Speaking of making changes, when you look around the room, you see quite a transition from different mediums, starting with ceramics to painting to prints and encaustic. Can you talk about your transition from one medium to another?
I can, because I don't, although I'm thought of as an encaustic artist now, a lot of people, my early work in clay, they ran a picture of this piece that I did in the Jewish Museum show. It was in the Sunday paper for 3 straight months. And a lot of people still, even close friends, still think, well, you do clay, you do Jewish stuff, right? I said, well, I haven't done that since 1985, but I used to. My approach is to find something that interests me. When I find something that interests me, that is my theme, that is what I'm going to be concentrating on. That's always in the back of my mind, no matter how abstract it gets. So if it requires doing something with plaster, or with cement, or with wood, or with clay, or with oil paint, or acrylic paint, I feel that I can do it. I studied with a very famous ceramic artist in 1982 or 3, Andrea Gill. She's really world famous. She teaches at Alfred University. And she told us a story. She said her husband told her, the secret to success as an artist is to believe that you are a genius and can solve every problem. I'm obviously not a genius, and she was, by the way. But if you have that attitude that you can solve it, especially you don't have to know all the answers yourself. I did not know anything about working with wood. We didn't even I didn't own a lawnmower. I certainly didn't own a table saw at that time. But we started buying that stuff because I had 2 very dear friends who were great with wood, and they helped me work with wood. The piece here, St. Apollonia, I had done some welding down in Santa Fe, but at the time, I never wanted to have a welding studio in my house. That just seemed like a very dangerous thing to have in your house. So I hired somebody who helped me weld this. He welded it. I told him what I wanted. So, and that is kind of how I've gone along. I wanted to learn encaustics. I eventually found a workshop on encaustics and learned encaustics. And that's, I heard Frank Stella interviewed by Terry Gross, and you're playing the role of Terry Gross very well, by the way, Marty. And Frank Stella, all these prints in the vestibule out here are Frank Stella's. That's spectacular. And Stella never did figure drawing in his classes. And they said, well, how can you get by? I mean, everybody does figure drawing to start with in art. He said, well, if I needed to do it, I would have one of my friends teach me how to do it. And that would be that. Or I'd maybe even hire them to do it in the painting or whatever. So it's not like you need to know every single thing in depth and be an expert in it. There's a whole world of expertise, and then there's Google.
One of the things that I notice when I look around all of your work is that there's a real connection to surface, that there's a real passion for surface. There's from the very beginning, your clay piece, there's a kind of a rubbed, organic, layered feeling to your surfaces. I think some people have remarked it's very delicious, it's very, it's just a really wonderful connection to surface. So why do you think that is, and why do you think that's carried through all these years?
I don't know why it is. I was talking to John Thornton, whose video this, thank you, John. And I get surface texture. I don't know, it just happens. I said if I worked in watercolor, I'd probably have surface texture. I'd be the only person who ever did. It just happens for me. Now in caustic, getting surface texture is a piece of cake. It's almost automatic that it will happen within caustic. It's hard to not get texture. But if I work in acrylic, you know, I'll get surface texture. And I love surface texture. And I love beautiful surfaces. It doesn't have to be textured to be beautiful. So that's something that I do pay attention to a lot. But I will say the encaustic surface is very special and unique. We have Michelle Marcoux sitting over there, who is a real special person in the encaustic world. There may be some others here, I don't know. Anyhow, it's a great technique for getting surface texture, and I think that's what attracted me when I first saw it in, I don't know, maybe in the late 90s or middle 90s. We're at the Museum of Modern Art, and I saw this painting by David Siqueiros, the famous Mexican muralist, and it said it was encaustic. I thought, oh boy, what the hell is that? I have to find out. So I started asking around. No one knew what it was. And I even went to Pearl Paint and I asked them, do you have encaustic? I says, I don't know, maybe. I said, what is it? He says, I don't know. So in 2005, we had a big conference, the first national conference on encaustic, which Michelle and Libby and some other people maybe are here participated in. And it started the encaustic revolution, I think, from that point on.
For people that are here that are not familiar with encaustic, can you speak a little bit as to what the technique is? It's actually a very ancient technique. Can you talk a little bit about the process itself?
Yes, it's a couple thousand years old. The Greeks and the Egyptians started it. They did beautiful work. The work is the most durable art material that there is. It's hot wax with pigment in it. Unfortunately, well, most of the artists died from it. It was toxic, and it still is toxic. However, we have learned how to deal with the toxicity with the proper ventilation and not getting it into your skin and so forth. It is, I'm still alive, I think, and are most of the people doing it. We haven't heard any bad reports about encaustic in a long time. So it's sort of caught on. It was very popular, and I think it's losing a little bit of its popularity because it's tough. It's a tough technique, and a lot of people tried it, and it wasn't so simple as it might look, and they went back to their oil painting or their acrylic painting. But it's still in use and growing slightly, not as vigorously as it was. But I am still enamored with it. For me, it's the greatest combination of both paint and sculpting all at the same time. So to me, that's just great.
So shifting gears just a little bit, when there's a time when you need, if there's a time that you need inspiration for your work, is there something that you look at or something you read, other artists, or something you do to inspire you? Yes.
We go to art galleries, we go to shows. We're going to try very hard to go to Henry Bermuda's and Michelle's show up in Denise Bibro Gallery in a couple weeks. And we try and see everything that's happening. We read magazines, we look at pictures. I can look at a photography magazine. I get great ideas from photography magazines, architecture magazines, from all stuff like that. I wouldn't say that I'm not inspired by like political issues that are going on. Usually, I'm not. There's a whole body of work here about ancient healing in medicine and dentistry. Now that is a more intellectual approach. I really studied the ancient history of that. So that was a little different. I haven't worked that way in a while. That was more intellectual approach to making art. And I'm more just working from my gut for the most part.
I'm intentionally leaving this question pretty open-ended. What are you most proud of?
My family. I am really. They are the best. See, Joe's over there. Is Ben here? Did Ben make it? Ben's there. Ben and Joe, Dan, Gwen, Libby, everybody. And the ones in Minnesota who aren't here. That's my proudest creation. But as you're asking about my artwork, I think the biggest transition was doing a piece like the Tooth Booth back there, that ancient medical dental shrine. That was quite an undertaking. And my friend like Dan Anderson and Joel Marcus helped me work through the wood part. And important, I mentioned that I had someone help me with the welding, and I had friends help me pour the concrete base and stuff. So I was like really just expanding. I mean, I hadn't heard Stella speak about just being able to do anything you wanted to do, and Andrea Gill hadn't told me just pretend that you can do anything you want to do. I just kind of thought I would take a risk and see how it worked out. So I don't know if I can pick any one piece that I'm most proud of. The piece that just fell off the wall has garnered the most acclaim from art critics and whatnot. I'll have to put a better wire on the back of it. It's very heavy. And it was featured in a lot of art reviews and stuff like that. So I guess that, but I like that piece a lot. There's a lot of pieces. There are pieces that are not even here that I like just as much. I don't know about more. I like different pieces for different reasons also. Like there was printmaking, doing the giraffe. That was an accomplishment. I was going up to North Adams in the Berkshires and we had access to this giant press, and it was very physical doing this piece. There's stuff here I don't think I can do anymore, by the way, because I've lost some of that physicality. But we had these presses that were, you didn't roll them, you actually had to pump them. They were hydraulic, so it was very challenging physically. And so I'm very proud of those. I'm very proud of that piece all the way at the far end. That was an interesting piece to do. It started out, it was about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And I actually showed that piece a long time ago. And I kept looking at it some years later, and I said, you know what? I'm not that crazy about this piece anymore. And I'm over my representational period anyhow. And I just painted over it completely. So I like the way it turned out very much so. That's all I can say. It's hard to pick out your favorite piece.
Well, you've told us what some of them are, and obviously in 2005 there were some people who really liked a piece, and you got an award in Scottsdale. So could you tell us a little about that?
That is my proudest award. It was very interestingly structured. Scottsdale has about 150 art galleries. About 100 of them show cowboys and Indians. But about 50 of them actually show something else. And they had all the people all the patrons that came through the gallery. They were able to choose the piece that they liked the best in the gallery. And at the end of the art season, they took the pieces that got the most votes from the public and put it into an exhibition. I had an exhibition in Scottsdale that year, but I wasn't there for the exhibition of the works that were chosen. And then they had this select group of art connoisseurs, people who ran galleries or museums and stuff, and they picked the winners in different categories, and my piece won for Best Contemporary Art. So, and that was also not only a great thing to get. I mean, we got dinner at a restaurant. I took lunch bill at the dinner. But the best part was that the piece then sold for a lot of money. The gallery was happy. And then that person bought an even twice as big, huge piece for a lot more money. So the gallery was extremely happy. I was enthralled. By the way, the work is for sale.
Oh, congratulations. You've also started something called the Art Incubator. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, that is something that we just love doing. Libby and I formed this team of teaching, and we don't collaborate on our artwork, just in case you were wondering. What? Ever. So you don't want me to ask you to collaborate now? We have something in mind, but it may not happen. But we do manage to collaborate pretty darn well, although we sometimes have public disagreements in when we're teaching. We let people know that right from the get-go. But we've had a great time teaching all over the country and even outside the country, teaching the Art Incubator workshops. We've had great experiences, very good feedback most of the time. It's been a great joy for me. I had been teaching encaustic workshops. Libby had been teaching various color workshops and some textile workshops. But this excites us because we feel we are teaching people the basics of how to do art so that you're not just learning some technical trick about art. So, and there are some students here, I'm looking at a couple of them here, and you're all invited we're going to Jamaica next January, if you want to join us. And we've also hooked up with Katana Samanen, who is in the audience here, a great psychotherapist, who we formed a workshop in creating from passion, where we sort of try to help people find what it is. If you're not passionate about what you're doing in art, it's the ones that you walk by so fast you can't even, you can have pretty colors. If the passion isn't in it, it just failed. I'm sorry, it just failed. Even no matter how pretty the colors and no matter how accurate the objects, it just doesn't pull you. So that was the purpose of that workshop, and it was very powerful. We've done it twice so far. We're probably going to do it more if somebody gets off their whatever. Okay, that's enough of that.
So as we begin to wind up this conversation, I saved this last section to last, and that's about ancient dentistry and medicine. This is an area I know that's very near and dear to your heart, and since you did work as a dentist for many years, I'm really curious, and I think a lot of people are, how that impacted your career as an artist, and that pun is intended. I think that the idea of the magic myth and molars, if you could talk a little bit about that and your work as a dentist and an artist.
So I was very impressed with Joseph Campbell. There's some people here who were in this Joseph Campbell study group that I started many years ago. And Campbell talked about heroes in our society. He wrote a book called Heroes with a Thousand Faces. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to find the heroes in dentistry. We have Albert Schweitzer in medicine, but in dentistry, there's nobody that we know of. So they actually ran a very big article about my search in the Journal of the American Dental Association, and I got stories from people about so-and-so rescued a dog once, and this guy did this and that, and I thought, well, that's terrific, but it's not Albert Schweitzer-like. So I failed in finding this part, it was supposed to be more. It was like I was trying to show that the average person, like there probably are accountants who do some heroic things. It's hard to imagine, but they could be. There could be, in any walk of life, I mean, there are people that do heroic and wonderful things, and we should celebrate those. But I just wasn't successful in doing it. So someone said, well, why don't you do dental history? So I went back and I looked at the dental history stuff, you know, so-and-so invented amalgams, and this guy invented white fillings, and this guy, oh yeah, that's it, grabbed me at all. So I said, well, how about like way back, because I remember we actually did have a dental history course in dental school. And I remember the first lecture, Dr. Faggart said, at the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia and Egypt, this is what happened. Anyhow, that was dental history. So I went back and I went to the library, took out some textbooks and started reading up on this. And it really grabbed me because it was really something. And it's good to have Harvey here because you know, this is how you would have been practicing had you been alive 2,000 years ago, more than 2,500 BC in Egypt as a pathologist. I don't know, they probably didn't need a pathologist then, but so what did you do? I started wondering, what did you do if you had a toothache? Where did you go? How did you fix it? There weren't a lot of great books on the subject. First of all, until about 1882, nobody understood the language, the hieroglyphs, until Champollion, he deciphered the Rosetta Stone. So then they started finding out what things were about. And there were different papyri, different papyri about the subject of medicine and even dentistry and different concoctions. And it was all folkloric. There was this piece here, which I found, there was something called the legend of the worm. The worm was the antagonist to the sun. The sun caused healing, the worm caused disease. And so some of these people made an assumption that there may have been little worms that caused your dental disease. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good thinking because bacteria are kind of worm-like. And so I have to celebrate that thought that somebody had, and they were right on the money, and they didn't have microscopes to prove it. So I invented this thing here called tabloid Babylonia, which talks about frogs, mice. There was another folklore that if you had a toothache, you would find a mouse, cut it open, and put it on the sore area. Sounds crude, but the truth is that years later, they invented things called poultices, which created warmth, and if you put something warm on this achy area, it probably helped. It probably also increased the inflammation, but at least it helped relieve the pain. But mostly people were getting stuff done by their priest. The priests were the caretakers of all the science in those days. They had access to medications. Medications were different concoctions, usually had some psychotropic aspect to them, like henbane was very popular, and that would put you in a kind of a hypnotic mood. And so the priest did that. They had waters that people would come and take baths in waters. So there was this, like, it was conceptual, it was spiritual. And then there were actual lay doctors. And these guys did do some treatment. They would do fenestration, poke a hole maybe in your brain, let some bad humors out, and abscesses, set bones that were broken, stuff like this. And they did a little bit of stuff like that. But the most fun people of all were these shamans. These people, they were usually relatives of the king and the pharaoh, and they were trained from childhood to be very spiritual, and they learned, like, we call it hypnosis, but they had different ways of creating a trance and so forth, and that was how you got cured. And then they also had opium. I did a whole series of work on opium. Opium was very popular because there were no other treatments. Didn't have any antibiotics, didn't have this and that. So you needed some relief, and opium was a great relief agent. And people, fortunately, didn't live that long either. They were gone by the time they were 35 or 40. So if you could just keep them comfortable and use the placebo effect and the hypnosis effect, you could be treating people. So Harvey, that's how they did it back then, you know. I know there's some other doctors. Dan, my son Dan, what do you think? What would you be doing for these people 4,000 years ago?
Opium and drilling.
What did he say?
Opium and drilling.
Opium and drilling. All right, well, anyhow, this changed my life doing the work about ancient dentistry. I really ventured into an unknown territory and had a great time with it, and even showed that big tooth booth in New York City in Soho, at West Broadway and Houston, and an amazing gallery. I just couldn't believe that had happened. So that was a big game changer.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. You have shared a lot with us and made the show so much richer for everyone, I think. So before we close out, does anyone have any questions for Alan?
Yes. I'm curious, I was just so delightfully surprised to see this and to see your early work. Can you explain this first piece?
Love to. I was in a painting class, my first painting class by accident. I was only interested in clay, and every summer for a week or two, Libby and I would study somewhere or other. And the class fell through, and we signed up for a workshop in painting at Bennington College. And one of the challenges was to just do something on a piece of canvas with just black and white, and I did this, and everyone looked at it and said, "Oh, it looks like teeth. It looks very toothy the way you did that." I thought, well, maybe there is something to that. At the same time, I was reading Carlos Castaneda's. Does anyone remember Carlos Castaneda's? The Yaqui Indian culture, and so the warrior, the warrior world that we enter, and I said, that's sort of like this toothy thing. The teeth are entering this world. It's not easy. It's a struggle at times, and that's sort of like the way man has to kind of deal with his world. So that's what this piece is about.
Is the text above it part of the piece?
Yeah, the text above it explains the piece.
Should read it.
I'll read it. Man emerges through the crust of the earth, out of the abyss, into a hostile veldt. Teeth erupt through the crest of the alveolus, out of the plasma, into a warrior's world. So,
Who wrote that?
Me. I was under the influence of Castanese. At one time, Libby and I were he turned out to be kind of a fraud in a way. But in any event, there was some, some intellectual validity to it. But we were in Mexico, and I remember sitting down in a plaza and saying, well, maybe one of the spirits from the Yaqui Indians will come visit me. But they did not, by the way. Yes, Warren.
You think back to your work in dentistry. As you were creating fillings and working in people's mouths, do you think back that there were certain things that you did that were artistically oriented that might well have, that you can explain more clearly in the work that you've done since then?
Yes, I will say that had I not become a dentist, I don't think I would have been an artist. I don't know for sure, of course, but first, I have to tell you that my grandfather, Elaine will vouch for this, they didn't believe in working with your hands at all. You worked with your brain. That was, do you remember Zeta always said that? So that was our background, and my father bought into that, and he never wanted me, he let me do some hard work in his warehouse sometimes, but other than that, no, you worked with your mind. That was what you developed. So I never took any art classes, I never did anything like that. Dentistry, I remember when I was thinking of going to dental school, one of the guys we played football with, Harvey Kramer, he was in dental school, and I called him, I said, what do I have to do? He says, well, I'll teach you how to carve chalk. You had to take a test to see if you had any manual dexterity, at least a little bit. And he taught me how to carve chalk. And I think I describe, and I do everything with my hands, as it turned out. Tennis is my love. Art is my love. That's what everything I've ever done has been with my dentistry was all about working with your hands, although your hands were just the extension of your brain. And same thing in art. It's an extension of the brain and the heart. It's, if you want to call that the soul or whatever you want to call it. But in dentistry, of course, you're trying to be very rational in your approach. So it's a lot different. A lot of dentists, we were just talking, was I talking with somebody here, Sandy? A lot of dentists do art stuff, but mostly they are doing craft stuff. They're making furniture or they're doing jewelry. This is an extension of what we do all day long in dentistry. We're making little trinkets that fit into teeth and around teeth and so forth. So that is not what I would call art. Art requires thinking in maybe an abstract way of thinking, thinking outside the lines. It's not the same as just following a design on a chart or something like that. That's not art. That's craft. And we certainly need good craftsmanship.
I think you have a question.
Catherine.
Oh, as a long-time participant of your art incubator, I always love the idea about how you gave advice about the notebooks. And I just wondered if you want to say something about, your going to museums and writing down ideas.
Yeah, thank you. These are great. I have all these people in the audience are asking great questions. I appreciate that. I love keeping notebooks, and it is another way of developing one's skills as an artist. So whenever I'm traveling, I started doing this because of my good friend Bill Ternay, who's an inveterate notebook keeper, a very famous television artist, and he started me off doing this. And so whenever we're traveling, I'm doing notes. I call them, there's sort of like an old scrapbook more than a sketchbook. I do some sketches, I paste pictures in there, I make notes, I write down phone numbers of people I meet and all that sort of stuff. So it's a big part of what I do. And I started doing it a lot when I was practicing and didn't have as much time to do art all the time, because there was always time to make a few notes on things that I would pursue. Unfortunately, I never pursued most of those ideas, but I was at least in the habit of writing down ideas and knowing that I had to work from ideas. So, is that what you were driving at? Thanks, Catherine. Yes.
I would just like to make a comment. Although I think you are a lovely Jewish dentist, heavily influenced by the ether and Novocaine that's been available to you, married to an artist, I think this is the best opening comments I've heard, and I'd like to congratulate your interviewer. I think that whole idea was a really good idea, and I really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you very much. We enjoyed having you here. Any other questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Yes, Margaret.
Well, your dentistry was a good part of your life.
Yes.
I wondered whether any of the tools.
Margaret wants to know if the tools of dentistry were instrumental in my work. I have passed out my tools to many art students to use them for making little sgraffito marks and so forth. But generally speaking, I wouldn't say it's, I mean, you can buy all these dental tools at hardware stores now. So it wasn't like I had a special inside track on some dental tools or something. Yeah, go ahead, Libby.
Marga, the art world uses many of the tools used in dentistry. If you're doing textiles, there's something, a resist called, they call it Gouda. In dentistry, it's called gutta percha. Everything that gets molded, that's how an inlay is made. It's a reverse, it's done by centrifugal force and molten metals, and a beautiful bronze statue is done the same way. So there's crossover, and I remember, because I came from being a dental hygienist, I was always shocked at the crossover. And so it's the knowledge of how materials behave that's terribly important, and you realize it as you're doing it. It's like, look at that, I know that stuff.
Are there any more questions? No? Well, Alan, thank you so much. Truly. I know Alan will be hanging around for a little while, so you can still enjoy the show and talk to him about some questions.
Thank you all for being so attentive. This was a very long talk. Thank you.
Very good for people who've been